They thought they buried his legacy in the basement, but when the vault finally cracked open, it unleashed a secret that ended their careers and started a war. The air in the sterile, glass-walled boardroom tasted like expensive cologne and nervous ambition. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, slanted across the polished mahogany table, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. Each one, I suspected, representing a year of my life I'd poured into this company, only to be standing here now, an outsider looking in. My son, Ethan, stood at the head of the table, radiating the kind of aggressive self-satisfaction only achieved by someone who believes they've definitively won a generational war. He was 32, sharper than I ever was at that age, and utterly convinced of my obsolescence. "So, Dad," he began, his voice smooth, almost artificially modulated, like a podcast host trying too hard to sound empathetic. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the stack of documents detailing the acquisition. "We're ready to sign the final papers for the divestiture of the old manufacturing division." Divestiture, that's what they called it. I called it selling off the heart of what my father and I built from a single shed and a rusty lathe. But sentimentality doesn't pay dividends in the modern market, and Ethan's market was ruthless efficiency. "The environmental compliance reports are solid?" I asked, my voice rasping slightly. I cleared my throat, trying to project the authority I used to command in this room, the authority he'd systematically dismantled over the last 18 months since he took over as CEO. Ethan waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Please, Richard. We had 3 external auditing firms go over the site. It's clean. Frankly, the headache of those antiquated facilities was costing us more in legacy maintenance than the actual output was worth. You kept those plants running out of sheer nostalgia." That stung. Nostalgia. He saw commitment as weakness. He saw my decades of grinding work as an inconvenient attachment to the past. "Those plants employed 500 people, Ethan," I countered, keeping my tone even, though my jaw ached from clenching it. "People who trusted us." He sighed, a sound manufactured purely for theatrical effect, making sure the 3 board members seated slightly behind him registered his patience. "And those 500 people are now pensioned off with fair severance, well above the industry standard thanks to my negotiations. Look, this isn't a values discussion. This is corporate restructuring. You signed off on the restructuring mandate when you handed over the reins, remember?" He was right, legally. When I decided to step back due to my failing health, the creeping exhaustion that seemed to sap the very will to argue from my bones, I gave him the latitude. I trusted him to build upon the foundation, not detonate it. "I remember agreeing to a pivot, not a demolition," I murmured, looking down at my hands. They were still strong, still capable, but they didn't feel like mine anymore. Ethan pushed the thick binder across the table toward me. "Sign here, Richard. We close the deal by end of day and you can enjoy your retirement. Travel, golf, whatever it is men like you do, once the spreadsheets are closed." The implication hung heavy. You are done. You are irrelevant. I picked up the pen. It felt foreign, too light. As I leaned over the document, the fluorescent lights overhead caught something in my periphery. Not on the table, but through the panoramic window overlooking the city skyline. I looked up, past Ethan's smug face, past the cityscape, to the top of the adjacent skyscraper, the shiny, new, ridiculously expensive beacon of modern finance that had just been completed across the plaza. It was the Atherton Tower. Ethan had bragged about securing the anchor tenancy for his new venture capital arm within that building just last month, a major status symbol. And then I saw the name etched in bronze, visible even from this distance, just above the main entrance. It wasn't the name of the developer or the primary tenant. It was mine. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought the boardroom might hear it over the gentle hum of the HVAC system. My name, Richard Vance, was displayed in bold, unmissable lettering on the Atherton Tower. Ethan followed my gaze, an annoyed frown creasing his brow. "What are you looking at, Dad? Focus. Sign the papers." I lowered the pen, my hand trembling, and pointed a steady finger directly at the window. "Ethan," I said, my voice suddenly clear, resonant, entirely my own again. "Tell me, son, who exactly owns the building I'm looking at?" Ethan's triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He glanced out, following my rigid line of sight, his jaw slackening as he processed the sheer, impossible reality of what he was seeing. He squinted, his eyes rapidly scanning the plaque at the top of the tower. That's impossible," he whispered, his composure finally cracking. "That building was financed and owned entirely by the Sterling Group. They finalized the sale last week. I was there for the ribbon cutting." I let the silence stretch, savoring the sudden, sickening realization dawning in his eyes. I leaned back in my chair, the cheap plastic creaking beneath me, a far cry from the custom leather I used to inhabit. "The Sterling Group," I echoed softly. "Funny thing about shell companies, Ethan. You think you're buying assets from them, but sometimes you're just signing away your future to the original holding entity." I paused, letting the gravity sink in. "And I sold the Sterling Group lock, stock, and barrel 3 months ago. I just never told you who the ultimate beneficiary was." Ethan's face went the color of spoiled milk. He bolted upright, overturning his water glass, sending a tidal wave across the acquisition papers. "You what? You sold everything? But that means—" He stared at me, his eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen since he was 7 and lost in a department store. "That means I just signed away the manufacturing division to you." I smiled then, a slow, cold expression that felt entirely earned. "Not exactly, Ethan. You signed away the division to the holding company that I now control, the one that owns the building across the street." He was hyperventilating now, looking around the room desperately at the silent board members. "This is fraud. You manipulated the audit. You can't— I own this building. I'm the tenant." I picked up a damp napkin and slowly dabbed at the spilled water near my documents, maintaining eye contact. "You lease space in my building, Ethan. And that lease, by the way, has a very specific termination clause tied to the liquidation of your current assets. Assets you just liquidated directly to me." I pushed the unsigned contract back toward him, the ink already blurring. "Now, tell me, CEO, are you signing over the division to its rightful owner, or are we going to have a very different kind of conversation about corporate espionage and market manipulation?" Ethan staggered back from the table, his gaze fixed on the window, his empire suddenly hanging by the thread of my mercy. "You absolute monster!" he spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "You planned this, all of it." "I planned for survival, Ethan," I corrected him, "but survival is rarely a tidy business. Now the pen is still in your hand. Sign it, or I'll have my legal team send over the eviction notice for the entire executive floor by noon." He snatched the pen, his hand shaking violently. He scribbled his signature across the bottom line of the divestiture agreement, a violent, jerky motion that looked more like self-harm than a legal transaction. He threw the pen down, breathing raggedly. "It's done," he choked out. "You win. What now? You take the plants, you let them fail. What do you plan to do with the whole rotting mess, Dad?" I leaned forward again, meeting his desperate, shattered gaze. The game wasn't over. It had merely entered a new, infinitely more dangerous phase. "Oh, Ethan," I sighed, picking up the signed contract and admiring my own signature on the top of the document, the true owner's acknowledgement. "I'm not interested in the rotting mess. I'm interested in what you didn't tell me about those plants. You were right about one thing. They are antiquated. But they aren't just manufacturing sites, are they?" I paused, watching the last vestiges of his confidence evaporate. "I pulled the original blueprints this morning, Ethan, the ones buried deep in the property records before Sterling Group ever touched them. And what I found down in sub-level 4 of the old Hawthorne facility has nothing to do with textiles or machinery. It looks like someone built a very secure, very deep vault under the foundation 50 years ago, and I have a sneaking suspicion that whatever they hid down there is far more valuable than the entire company you just sold me." The silence that followed my revelation was thick enough to choke on. Ethan, who moments before had been the apex predator in the room, now looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting between me and the glass walls, as if searching for an escape route that didn't involve admitting his deepest secret. "Vault?" he finally managed, his voice thin, stripped bare of its former bravado. He tried to laugh, a dry hacking sound. "Dad, you're losing it. Hawthorne is a textile warehouse. It's been producing synthetic blends since '78. There's nothing down there but concrete and groundwater." I shook my head slowly, tapping the crisp original architectural drawings spread beside the signed papers. These weren't the glossy, sanitized schematics he'd reviewed for the environmental assessment. These were the raw, ink-on-vellum blueprints, smelling faintly of damp earth and something metallic, the signature of my father's obsessive design habits. "Look closer, Ethan," I instructed, my voice dropping conspiratorially, forcing him to physically move closer to my side of the table, invading my territory. "See this section? Marked Utility Access, Level B4. It's not listed on any of the modern schematics I reviewed last week. It's sealed off, poured over with specialized aggregate that your environmental team wouldn't have even bothered testing for contaminants because it's structurally irrelevant to the upper floors." He leaned over the table, his breath hot against my ear, and traced the outline of the sealed section with a hesitant finger. The boardroom, with its perfect view of my tower, suddenly felt claustrophobic. "What is it then?" he muttered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. He knew what I was implying, that he had inherited more than just a failing business unit. He had inherited a secret he was too arrogant to investigate. "It's where my father kept his real assets," I explained, leaning back, letting him stew in the implication of his own negligence. "He always said, 'Richard, never put all your eggs in one visible basket.' When he built that place, he had a paranoia about banks, about government seizures. He built a bolt hole, something he could liquidate instantly, something untraceable." Ethan straightened up, trying desperately to reclaim some semblance of control. "If there was something valuable hidden there, something liquid, why didn't you ever mention it? Why wait until now?" "Because," I said, picking up the pen again, not to sign but just to hold, "I needed to make sure that you couldn't touch it, leverage it, or sell it off to some international buyer as part of your restructuring. I needed a guarantee that when I finally took possession of that property, I'd get everything attached to the deed, including the basement full of forgotten treasure. You handed me the keys willingly." He paced away from the table, running both hands through his perfectly styled hair, disturbing the facade completely. "This is extortion, Dad. Even if there is something down there, it's buried under decades of concrete. It would take a crew, specialized equipment. It would take months to breach that level safely." "Months you don't have," I pointed out pleasantly. "Because you see, I didn't just buy the manufacturing division through Sterling Group. I also purchased the controlling interest in Hawthorne's immediate neighboring property." Ethan froze mid-stride. He turned around so fast I thought he might strain something. His expression was a perfect mosaic of disbelief and pure, undiluted panic. "The lot next door? The abandoned dry cleaner? That's worthless. It was slated for demolition." "It was," I confirmed, nodding slowly, "but I put a hold on the demolition order this morning, and I hired a small, discreet excavation team. They're not experts in safe-cracking, Ethan. They're experts in rapid, targeted subsurface penetration, the kind that doesn't care much for historical preservation or seismic reports." I stood up, pushing my chair in with a decisive scrape. I walked to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, both of us looking across the short expanse separating the corporate monument of the Atherton Tower from the derelict, dust-covered dry cleaner lot. "My team starts drilling on that lot tonight, Ethan. They're not going in through the front door of Hawthorne. They're coming in laterally, directly into the back wall of level B4. They'll be there within 24 hours, and they'll bring whatever you father deemed worth hiding 50 years ago right up to the surface." Ethan stared, his chest heaving. The silence was broken only by the distant, low rumble of city traffic, a sound that suddenly seemed to be vibrating with hidden potential. "You think you can just walk in there and take it?" he whispered hoarsely. "You think you know what you're digging up? You have no idea what my grandfather, what your father was involved in before he settled down to make textiles. That vault isn't filled with gold coins, Richard. It's filled with the reason he left his first life behind." My blood ran cold despite the sudden heat of fury and revelation coursing through me. I turned to face him fully. "What are you talking about? What first life?" Ethan seemed to realize in that instant that he had finally found a piece of leverage, a shared dark history that might derail my meticulous plan. He saw the confusion in my eyes, the crack in my composure, and he pounced. He wasn't just a paranoid machinist, Dad. He was a courier, a specialist. And that vault, it's not for his retirement fund. It's for his debt. And if you open that thing without knowing the code sequence to disarm the internal containment field, you won't just find a hidden legacy. You'll find the reason the FBI was sniffing around this city back in the 60s. He took a step back, regaining a sliver of his footing. If you breach that seal without authorization, you won't just be inheriting old blueprints, Richard. You'll be inheriting a federal hazard. And the only person who knows how to bypass that system, the one who drew the schematics, is currently downstairs, signing over the deed to the old textile division to you. He pointed at the signed paperwork. If you take that land, you take the responsibility for whatever weaponized disaster is waiting in the dark. And you have 24 hours until my rivals in the East Wing catch wind of this divestiture and realize you are the primary lien holder on the assets they actually want. He leaned in, his eyes locking onto mine, dark and desperate. Tell me, Dad, are you willing to blow up half the block and your own reputation just to claim what your father buried? The word weaponized hung in the air, heavy and toxic, immediately scrubbing away the satisfaction of the corporate victory. My father, the stern, quiet man who taught me how to square a bearing and respect a tight tolerance, involved with the FBI, specialized couriers, and hidden debts? It sounded like the fevered delusion of a cornered executive, but Ethan's conviction, the genuine terror replacing his usual smugness, was alarmingly convincing. "Containment field?" I asked, the question laced with disbelief. "Ethan, you are grasping at straws. My father was a craftsman, not a spy." "That's the story he gave you," Ethan hissed, gesturing wildly toward the window, as if the imposing shadow of the Atherton Tower was suddenly judging us. "He used the textile machinery as a cover. He made enough money to set us up, yes, but the real payload wasn't the profits, it was the secrecy. If there's a vault that valuable, the only person who could have financed that kind of subterranean build without alerting federal scrutiny was someone highly connected, and those connections always come with strings attached." He walked back to the table, his movements jerky, and picked up the original blueprints again, his touch reverent now, fearful of the power he was handling. "Look at the cross-section for the blast door on level B4. See the material composition. That's not commercial-grade steel, Dad. That's proprietary alloy layered shielding. It's designed to withstand extreme pressure and likely high-yield explosive penetration." My own mind was racing. I remembered my father late at night, working in his dusty shed, the smell of oil and sweat clinging to him, always jumpy, always making me swear absolute secrecy about his late-night projects. I'd always assumed it was illegal tax evasion, a buried stash of cash, not this. "If this is true," I said slowly, pushing the corporate maneuvering to the back of my mind, focusing on the immediate threat, "why didn't you uncover this when you ran the environmental diagnostics? Your team scanned the entire footprint for structural integrity before you even bid on the division." Ethan let out a bitter, cynical laugh. "Because, Richard, I operate under the assumption that the only things worth hiding are corporate secrets or misplaced zeros. I didn't bother to check for Cold War leftovers. I needed clean reports to sell the division fast. My focus was the P&L statement, not whatever paranoid fantasy my grandfather dreamed up." He looked at me, his expression hardening with a dangerous realization. "But you knew. You pulled those ancient drawings for a reason. You were looking for this, weren't you?" The accusation stung, but it was true. The moment I felt the ground shifting under my feet after handing over control, I started digging into the foundational history, the parts Ethan considered irrelevant. I was looking for security, I admitted, meeting his gaze squarely, and I found something far more volatile. "So we have two problems, son. 1. My team is drilling toward a potential bomb tonight. 2. If this vault is what you fear, the people who were owed the debt, the people who funded your grandfather's courier work, might not appreciate me taking possession of collateral they thought was long gone." I pulled out my phone, intending to call my security chief, intending to halt the excavation immediately. But before I could dial, Ethan snatched the phone from my hand. "No, you can't stop them now. If you halt the drilling, they'll just assume you're covering something up. You have to see what's inside first. You have to confirm the risk before you potentially alert every government agency that still has an active file on your father's old associates." He looked down at the blueprints again, his fear morphing into a desperate, reckless curiosity. "I know the company that manages the perimeter security for the East Wing rivals. They run deep-level scanning. If we can get a preliminary scan of the interior, just a quick mapping of the contents, we can determine if it's money or something far worse. If it's something worse, we control the narrative before the federal files get reopened." The irony was sharp. The son who ruined me now needed my expertise, my secret access, just to survive the consequences of my own secret knowledge? And how do you propose we get a deep-level scan of a sealed, proprietary vault without alerting the people who might be watching the property? I challenged him. Ethan's eyes lit up with a terrible, frantic energy. We use the penthouse, the Atherton Tower. He pointed across the plaza again. It has state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar installed for infrastructure assessment. It's high-powered, meant for surveying the bedrock under the entire plaza. If we run a diagnostic sweep tonight from the top floor, we might get enough data to tell us exactly what we're facing before my team breaks through the final layer of shielding. It was insane. It was arrogant. It was the only viable plan that acknowledged the ticking time bomb beneath Hawthorne. You're suggesting we trespass in my building, I said, the realization hitting me fully. My building. His current HQ. Yes, Ethan urged, grabbing my arm. I still have access codes for another few hours until the full transition locks me out. We go up now. We scan. If it's just paper or cash, we proceed carefully. If it's dangerous, we can use the internal comms to warn the crew to back off, seal the breach, and let the debt collectors deal with the empty hole. The pressure was immense. Every second wasted meant my crew might be drilling into a live wire, or worse, someone else might be alerted to the instability of the Hawthorne site. The only way to control the danger was to see it. Fine, I conceded, snatching my phone back from him. But you're not coming with me. If this goes sideways, I need plausible deniability. You stay here, try to look busy signing your surrender papers, and pray your East Wing rivals don't smell blood before sunrise. Ethan nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face, quickly replaced by grim determination. I'll hold the fort, Dad. Just be careful. And if you see anything down there that looks like military ordnance, for God's sake, don't touch the wires. I didn't answer. I just took the express elevator down, the one that bypassed all the executive floors, heading straight to the ground level where my waiting car idled. The journey up the 30 floors to the penthouse observation deck felt like a pilgrimage to my own potential undoing. When I stepped out onto the empty, breathtaking observation floor of the Atherton Tower, the city lights stretched out like scattered diamonds beneath me. The specialized scanning equipment was exactly where Ethan said it would be, a bank of servers tucked behind a sleek partition. I logged in using the temporary access code he'd jotted down on the back of a napkin, the same napkin that detailed the collapse of his career. I calibrated the GPR system, feeding in the precise coordinates of the Hawthorne sublevel, watching the interface flicker to life. The display began populating with real-time subterranean data, mapping rock density, water tables, and structural anomalies. The signal cut through the earth, moving past the decades of concrete, past the foundations of the old textile mill. My breath hitched. There it was, not a scattered pile of valuables, but a perfectly defined, symmetrical chamber, exactly matching my father's blueprint. The alloy shielding was registering just as Ethan described, impenetrable to standard sonar. Then the system detected something inside the chamber, something dense, metallic, and utterly unmistakable, even through the distortion of the earth. It wasn't paper or gold bars. It was a series of sealed cylindrical containers, stacked precisely. I zoomed in on the spectral analysis, enhancing the faint outlines of the container's signatures. The readout pulsed red, indicating high levels of unusual isotopes, And then, beneath the structural mapping, a secondary automated alert flashed across the screen, triggered by the unique energy signature emanating from the vault. Warning: unstable isotopic signature detected. Containment field integrity at 98.4%. Suggest immediate evacuation of adjacent zones. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silent, deadly truth revealed on the screen. My father hadn't buried a fortune. He had buried a ticking clock. And then the system registered a second, external spike. A signal moving toward the Hawthorne property, not from my crew, but from across the city. Incoming proximity alert. Unidentified high-velocity vehicle detected heading directly toward Hawthorne site. ETA, 4 minutes. The warning light on the GPR console was flashing an aggressive, insistent red, painting my face in hues of emergency. Unstable isotopic signature, containment field integrity dropping, slowly, but dropping nonetheless. And now, an external threat, closing in fast on the very target I was trying to secure. Someone else knew about the vault, and they weren't sending an auditor. They were sending a strike team. I slammed the pause scan command, freezing the screen on the damning image of the cylindrical containers, their spectral signatures burning bright, indicating something volatile, something beyond mere hidden cache. 4 minutes. That was not enough time to call my excavation crew, coordinate a retreat, or even reach Ethan, who was still down in the boardroom, playing the role of the defeated CEO. I grabbed my phone, my fingers flying across the contacts list, bypassing my head of security. Too slow, too bureaucratic. I needed immediate surgical action. I dialed the number for the head of the discreet Black Ops acquisition team Sterling Group actually employed for sensitive property seizure. My team. The call went straight to voicemail, cycling through 3 pre-recorded messages before landing on a harsh, digitized tone. All channels currently restricted pending transfer completion. Please contact your primary liaison. Ethan. He'd locked down the communication lines, cutting me off from the very team I needed to stop the drilling. He was either desperately trying to control the information flow, or he'd already panicked and started making deals with the devil lurking in the shadows. I looked back at the GPR readout. The external vehicle was accelerating, clearly not adhering to standard city traffic regulations. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to reclaim collateral. I had to stop them physically, or at least slow them down long enough for my own crew, the ones drilling from the adjacent property, to breach the outer perimeter of the vault and stabilize the contents, whatever they were. I spun around, assessing the penthouse floor. It was high-tech, sterile, and utterly devoid of any practical means of defense or pursuit, except for the windows. 30 stories up, but they were floor-to-ceiling, commercial-grade glass designed to withstand hurricane winds, but certainly not a high-caliber round. I ran to the service elevator, bypassing the main panel and jamming my key card into the emergency override slot. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing nothing but empty space leading down. Override engaged. Destination? The automated voice queried, unnervingly calm. Basement 1. Emergency access tunnel Delta. I barked. Basement 1 was the parking structure beneath the Atherton Tower, directly connected via subterranean service tunnels to the neighboring, condemned dry cleaner lot, where my excavation crew was waiting. The elevator dropped like a stone. The G-forces pressed me against the rear panel. I pulled my own phone back out, ignoring the restricted call warning, and sent a single coded text message to my head of on-site operations. Mark, code red. Initiate immediate containment protocol. Do not wait for breach. If isotopic spike confirmed, abort excavation and secure site by any means. The response was instantaneous, thankfully bypassing the main network lock. Confirmed, crew at outer wall, stand-bying for green light. But sir, the external signature is already active. We aren't alone. They aren't alone. My heart sank. Whoever was coming in, high speed toward Hawthorne, likely had their own surveillance running. They might know my crew was there before I even knew the vault contained anything remotely explosive. The elevator slammed to a stop in the subterranean parking level. The air here was stale, concrete dust hanging in the dim emergency lighting. I sprinted toward Tunnel Delta, a narrow, rarely used maintenance corridor built to service utility lines running beneath the plaza. As I rounded the corner, my path was blocked, not by an empty space, but by a figure, tall, built like a concrete pillar, wearing a dark, unmarked tactical suit. He was blocking the tunnel entrance completely, holding a specialized, compact breaching tool that looked far more advanced than the conventional demolition gear I'd issued my crew. He didn't speak. He didn't even look angry. He simply looked efficient. I stopped dead, my mind scrambling for a weapon, a distraction, anything. I was carrying nothing but my phone and the weight of a family legacy I suddenly realized was built on high-stakes crime. "Stop right there," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady, the corporate composure returning in the face of direct physical threat. "This area is under temporary corporate lockdown. You need authorization to proceed." The man raised the breaching tool slightly, pointing the muzzle, not at me, but toward the concrete wall of the tunnel leading toward the dry cleaner lot. "Primary objective retrieval," the man stated, his voice synthesized through a vocoder, devoid of inflection. "Unauthorized personnel must be neutralized to prevent contamination of the asset recovery zone." Contamination. That meant they knew exactly what was in that vault, and they viewed my excavation crew, and me, as a hazard to their operation. They weren't just creditors. They were cleanup specialists. "You're too late," I challenged, trying to buy time. "The ownership of the property has officially transferred. That vault now belongs to Richard Vance." The man paused, his masked head tilting almost imperceptibly. "Negative. The transfer occurred after the asset was flagged for reclamation by the original stakeholders. Your paperwork is voided by pre-existing lien." He took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance. "Step aside, Mr. Vance, or we begin the neutralization sequence here, in the tunnel. It will be quick but messy, and I guarantee you the subsequent investigation will be far more thorough than anything your son could manage." I knew I couldn't outfight him, but maybe I could outsmart him. If he was focused on neutralizing me to reach the tunnel, he hadn't yet registered the true threat, the unstable contents of the vault itself. I took a calculated risk. I dropped my phone and simultaneously slapped the emergency release on the tunnel's main utility conduit, sending a massive surge of electrical current directly into the overhead service lines running parallel to the tunnel floor, the lines that would eventually service the area where my crew was attempting to drill through the retaining wall. Sparks erupted instantly, blindingly bright, showering down from the ceiling. The synthesized voice of the operative wavered, and the man staggered back, raising his arms to shield his optical sensors from the sudden electrical discharge. "What did you do?" the vocoder shrieked, the smooth professionalism shattered by static. "I just gave my crew the green light," I yelled over the roaring sound of the arcing electricity. "They aren't waiting for my call anymore. They're drilling now." I dove low, rolling under the man's momentarily raised weapon, scrambling toward the deeper shadows of the utility corridor. I heard the distinct rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy-duty pneumatic drills echoing faintly through the bedrock, much closer than they should have been, fueled by my desperate text message. The operative recovered with terrifying speed. The electrical surge hadn't disabled him, it had just diverted his attention. He lowered his weapon, the muzzle now steady, pointing directly at my retreating form. Asset retrieval supersedes all other priorities, the vocoder stated flatly, the sound cutting through the electrical crackle. Containment will be established over the breach point. He didn't fire yet. He was waiting for the sound of my crew succeeding or failing, waiting for the signal that the vault was either secured or breached. I scrambled to a stop at the mouth of the service tunnel connecting to the dry cleaner's sublevel, looking back. The operative stood perfectly framed by the shower of electrical sparks, his weapon tracking my every move. "You have seconds, Vance," he warned. Then, from deep within the earth beneath the abandoned lot, came a sound that wasn't the steady thud of my crew's drilling. It was a single, colossal, sickening groan of stressed concrete, followed by a sound like the entire world inhaling, a deep, powerful vacuum that sucked the very air from the tunnel. The GPR alert on my frozen phone screen, still sitting back on the penthouse table 30 stories up, flashed a new horrifying message. Containment field integrity, 0.0%. The external operative stiffened, his vocoder sputtering into silence. His weapon clattered against the concrete floor as he fell heavily to his knees, his tactical suit suddenly looking very frail. He clutched his head, a raw human scream tearing past the broken synthesizer. "It's releasing! It's going critical!" He managed to gasp, his voice suddenly high and terrified. The voice of a man who knew exactly what kind of weaponized material his superiors had sent him to collect. From the depths of the earth beneath the dry cleaner's lot, a bright ethereal green light began to pulse, visible even through the thick layers of soil and concrete, casting an unnatural, sickly glow up into the parking garage. And with that light came a smell, sharp, metallic, and utterly alien, that made my eyes water and my skin crawl. I had wanted to secure the secret. I had only succeeded in opening the door. And the thing that had just stepped out of the vault wasn't coming for the containers anymore. It was coming for the air, the structure, and anyone breathing within a quarter mile of the breach. The sickly green glow intensified, pushing back the dim yellow emergency lights of the parking garage. It wasn't the glare of a chemical reaction. It was colder, more focused, like bioluminescence scaled up to catastrophic proportions. The operative, who moments ago had been a disciplined, terrifying soldier, was now reduced to a whimpering, defeated husk, tearing futilely at his own helmet, trying to escape the presence he'd been sent to contain. My mind, honed by years of crisis management in the boardroom, clicked into survival mode. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just some buried weapon. This was something that actively radiated danger, something that bypassed physical barriers and attacked biological systems. The containment field hadn't just failed. It had vaporized, releasing whatever volatile, exotic material my paranoid grandfather had walled up 50 years ago. I didn't hesitate. I spun away from the incapacitated operative and sprinted toward the deepest, darkest recess of the parking structure, the one area where the utility tunnels branched off, furthest from the Hawthorne site. I needed distance, and I needed cover from that unnatural light. As I ran, I pulled out my phone again. The internal communication system was still jammed, but the external network, the regular cellular grid, might still be functioning, at least briefly, before the escalating energy signature caused a complete regional blackout. I reached a concrete pillar, leaning against it, gasping for air that suddenly felt thin and poisoned. I dialed Ethan's personal cell. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice tight with panic. "Dad, what was that sound? The whole floor is shaking. The power flickered. Are the drills still going? Did you see anything?" "Ethan, listen to me. This is not a negotiation. This is an evacuation order. The vault is open. Whatever is down there, it's lethal. Forget the debt, forget the division, forget the building. Get out of the city center now." "What do you mean, lethal? Is it explosives?" he demanded, his need for concrete data overriding his terror. "Worse," I choked out, watching the green light intensify, now visible even filtering through the thick concrete above me. "It's an environmental collapse. I'm losing communications. I need you to trigger the building lockdown sequence for the entire Atherton complex. Full structural sealing. Every window, every door. Seal the airspace. Now, Ethan." A moment of silence, then a sound of frantic keyboard tapping filtered through the phone. "The emergency protocol? That's a 4-hour mandatory quarantine. Dad, I can't authorize that without a declared level 5 threat." "I am the threat, Ethan. I opened the door. Now seal it. If that energy signature spreads beyond the Hawthorne lot, your penthouse view will be the last thing you ever see." I heard him hesitate, the weight of corporate liability battling with primal fear. He was a CEO, but I was his father. He had to choose. "Initiating quarantine protocol 7 Delta," he finally ground out, the sound of a massive system override echoing faintly through the phone. "It's locking the tower down. But Dad, I can't get out of the boardroom. The inner security doors are cycling." "Stay calm. Stay away from the windows," I screamed, knowing full well that a containment field breach of this magnitude would render glass irrelevant. I ended the call. The green light pulsed again, stronger this time, and I heard a deep, grating sound from the direction of the utility tunnel. The sound of heavy machinery being violently wrenched apart. My crew had hit the perimeter, realized the danger, and tried to pull back, but whatever energy was radiating from the vault was overpowering the structural integrity of the immediate area. I looked back at the operative. He was still on his knees, rocking slightly, whispering a sequence of numbers that didn't sound like English or even recognizable modern code. "The sequence!" I barked at him, scrambling closer, maintaining a wide berth from the spreading green aura. "The disarm sequence. Tell me the code." The operative looked up, his eyes wide, no longer fearful but resigned. "It's not a disarm sequence, Mr. Vance," he whispered, his voice raw and human now that the vocoder was failing. "It's an activation primer. He didn't want it found. He wanted it activated on command." He pointed a trembling finger toward the ceiling, directly above us, through the massive concrete slab separating us from the plaza. "He sold the debt to the wrong people. They paid him in silence, and in this." With his last surge of lucidity, the operative reached up, clawed at the malfunctioning helmet one last time, and ripped it off. Beneath the visor was a man, terrified and deeply familiar. Not a government agent, but one of the high-ranking logistics directors from the East Wing rival firm, the very people Ethan had warned me about. "Your son tried to sell you the shell of the company," the man gasped, blood trickling from his nose. "But I was here to secure the payload. We've been monitoring the Hawthorne site for years, waiting for the ownership transfer. We knew you'd eventually find the plans." He weakly pointed toward the flickering phone I dropped near the entry point. Use the GPR, the other reading, the one that appeared when the field destabilized. It's a secondary beacon. The payload isn't just toxic material, it's a receiver. And it just linked with the command signal from the East Wing's mobile recovery unit. Before I could process the implication that the vault had just broadcast its location to my rivals, the man slumped over, lifeless. I snatched up my phone. The GPR display was still frozen on the penthouse view, but overlaid on the original data was a new, faint signal emanating from outside the plaza, moving rapidly toward the compromised Hawthorne site. A mobile recovery unit. They weren't trying to drill. They were coming in to harvest the released material, already knowing exactly where the energy burst would originate. I didn't have time to warn Ethan again. I didn't have time to call the police, who would likely be powerless against whatever this was. I had one move left, the one that might destroy my inheritance, but save my life, and perhaps the city block. I scrambled back to the utility conduit control panel. The fire alarm system and the main structural stabilizers for the entire plaza were routed through this junction, the very infrastructure Ethan had been preparing to quarantine. I took the schematic drawings, now damp and smelling of ozone, and found the schematic for the main structural supports beneath the center of the plaza, the very earth between the Atherton Tower and the compromised Hawthorne site. If I couldn't stop the external retrieval unit, I could bury them all. With a desperate cry, I slammed the main emergency breaker, overriding the quarantine protocols Ethan had initiated. Instead of sealing the buildings, I triggered a controlled, calculated structural failure across the entire subterranean level of the plaza. A localized, targeted collapse, timed perfectly for the moment the recovery team arrived at the breach point. The explosion wasn't deafening. It was a deep, subterranean thump, immediately followed by the grinding shriek of stressed foundation supports giving way across acres of bedrock. The ground beneath my feet lurched violently. I threw myself behind the massive concrete support pillar as debris began raining down from the ceiling. The green light from the tunnel winked out, instantly replaced by total darkness as the primary power grid failed under the strain of the localized collapse. When the violent shaking subsided, the silence was absolute, broken only by the slow drip of water somewhere nearby. The air was heavy, smelling of concrete dust, ozone, and spent energy. I waited 5 agonizing minutes, listening for any sound, any movement from the tunnel, from the surface, from Ethan in the tower above. Nothing. The subterranean section was dead quiet. Cautiously, I rose. I found the emergency exit stairwell and began the long, slow climb upward toward the surface exit of the parking garage, praying the structure of the Atherton Tower held, praying Ethan was safe within his sealed fortress, praying the terrifying payload of my father's past was now sealed forever beneath tons of collapsing earth and reinforced concrete. I finally burst out onto the street level. The plaza was a disaster zone, emergency lights flashing weakly, the street choked with dust. I looked up at the Atherton Tower. The windows were dark, sealed tight. It looked like a tomb. Then a small service door near the base of the tower hissed open, propelled by emergency pressure. Ethan stumbled out, his designer suit ripped, his face smeared with grime, breathing like a marathon runner. He looked at the ruined plaza, at the gaping maw where the dry cleaner lot used to be, and then he looked at me, the man who had just dismantled his corporate victory and nearly buried him alive, all to secure a ghost from the past. He walked toward me, his eyes burning with a fury that dwarfed his earlier panic. "You didn't secure anything, you old fool," he spat, standing toe-to-toe with me in the dust. "You just sacrificed the only viable asset we had left, the land, to stop a threat you don't even understand." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "But you won't be able to enjoy your victory for long, because when you blew that supports, you didn't just bury the recovery unit. You triggered the fail-safe my grandfather put in place, the final layer." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "That vault wasn't just holding contraband, Richard. It was holding leverage. And now that the seal is broken and the debt collectors are gone, the real owners are coming to collect what your father owed them, and they're not interested in real estate. They're interested in the man who signed the deed." From the far end of the devastated street, I heard the distant, unmistakable sound of heavy transport helicopters beginning to spool up their rotors, moving in fast, cutting through the silence of the dawn. They weren't coming for the vault. They were coming for the signatory.